Jesus encouraged us to know the signs of times, to be able to look ahead and prepare for whatever is coming. Basically, Jesus was saying, hey, the future is out there, so be ready for it. And you should be able to be ready for it because you should be able to read the signs of the times. But most of us, as pastors and ministry leaders, we get caught in everyday challenges, everyday interruptions. We get caught up in our phones ringing. We get caught up on the knock on the door. We get caught up in emails, and we get caught up in problems and challenges. And for most of us in ministry, we spend most of our time just keeping up with today and not really having time to look ahead, to prepare for the future, to even prepare for next week or next month or next year. We are just overwhelmed. And what I want to do is I want to help us today. I want to help us to understand how we can begin today to prepare for the future, how we can begin to see what the future looks like. You, as a pastor and ministry leader, can begin to prepare your church for whatever challenges, whatever changes, whatever is coming down the pipe. You can begin today to prepare them for those days so that when the challenges come, you're ready to go. And we're going to do that with a tool that I'm going to teach you how to do in this episode. So let's get started. So the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. I hope you are doing wonderfully wherever you are and whatever it is you are doing. Our goal here at Ministry Hackers is to help you as a pastor, as a ministry leader, help you live your best life possible, your dream life. Pastor a growing church or ministry, love the people that God has placed in your life, really lead them closer to Him, while at the same time spending time with your family and your friends and your hobbies and traveling and reading those books that you've always wanted to read, or going golfing, or being a part of a knitting group or a kayaking group or a whatever group. I just want you to be able to live a fulfilled life, a happy life, a joyful life that's also coupled with a healthy ministry life. And so that's what we do here at Ministry Hackers. I'm so glad you're here. So glad you're a part of this episode. And I'm excited about this episode. I mentioned a couple episodes ago that we are going to do some work in preparing for the future. One of my degrees is in foresight, strategic foresight. And that is basically preparing for the future. And so I want to teach you how to do that in some of these episodes coming up. And so a couple episodes ago, in episode 157, How to See the Future, I talked to you about what foresight is, what it looks like, how it works, and kind of the benefits of being able to look ahead and understand what the future will look like, or at least have a good understanding or idea of what the future is going to look like, so that we can prepare today, so we can start making decisions today to prepare for then. None of us could have prepared for 2020, a global pandemic, a complete shutdown. None of us could have prepared for that. However, many churches were prepared to pivot to an online format. Many churches were ready to pivot to an online communication system. They were able to pivot and weather the storm of 2020 and even most of 2021 with very little impact on what they were doing in ministry. And so for those who are ready for that, I want more of us to be ready for whatever's coming next, whatever's coming down the pipe, whatever event, whatever change, whatever societal shift is coming. I want us to be ready for that. I want to help you do that. And so some of these episodes coming up, we're going to dive into the tools and the tricks and the tips on how you can have a better understanding of the future, prepare your staff, your board, even your congregation to navigate the changes that are coming down the pipe. And so today what I want us to do is I want to focus on horizon scanning. One of the first steps in foresight work, or understanding strategic foresight and what the future holds, is doing a horizon scan. Now, many of us are familiar with a SWOT analysis. So if you have downloaded my SWOT analysis template, or if you are familiar with SWOT analysis, where you look at your church, you look at your ministry, and you evaluate it based on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's a very common strategy strategic planning tool that gets used in organizations all over the world, but also in churches. We use the SWOT analysis to evaluate a ministry. We get to do a SWOT analysis to evaluate an event. If you, for instance, if you have an Easter egg hunt in the spring, you sit down afterwards and you do a SWOT analysis, you better understand how to make it better, how to shift it, or even ask the question, should we keep doing it? So SWOT analysis is a pretty familiar tool for many people. And so if you are familiar with it, it's a great starting point. However, a SWOT analysis is really a tool that's focused on understanding where you are as an organization right now. Where is your church today? Where is your church in the current situation that it's in, the current scenarios? What is happening right now? What are the current strengths and weaknesses of your church? The current threats and opportunities that are there for your church. That's what a SWOT analysis is for. Horizon scanning takes it one step further and really looks beyond the here and now and looks, it's as if you're lifting your head and you're looking out over the horizon and you're looking way out and you're asking yourself the question, what's coming? What is happening and what's coming? And that's really done by identifying trends that are happening currently. So what are the things that are currently happening? And we can see that this is going to continue to go. So for instance, in the tech space, we know that the storage, online storage, the capability of storage, we know that that's just going to continue to increase. For some of us who are old enough, we remember getting our first phones or our first computers, and there was almost no memory on those things. They functioned and they worked, but you really couldn't store a lot of data on there. Well, now you can easily go out and buy a small portable storage space that's multiple terabytes of memory, and it's getting smaller and it's expanding more. And so we know we can see that the trend is that storage space is going to continue to increase, which means that there's going to be things coming down the pipe of how do we keep up with the power usage for all that storage, and how do we create server farms in different areas of the country. So I'm originally from Iowa. My family is still there. And Facebook has multiple server farms right around the area where I grew up. These huge, huge buildings. And the only thing there are servers inside those buildings and one or two people that manage it and oversee all the tech pieces of it. But it's just a giant field inside of a building with servers that keep up all of the data usage across Facebook all over the world. And so that's what a trend would look like. And so for us in church and in ministry and even understanding people, what are the trends? That's what horizon scanning is. It's identifying what the trends are so we can understand what is going to happen moving forward. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk through where we are today and how trends have led us through in the area of staffing. Have you tried to hire a youth pastor or a kids pastor in the last few years? If you have, you know how difficult that can be. And even if you don't know it for sure, you probably sense that there is a growing shortage of pastors across the board, whether it's kids ministry, youth ministry, even at every other level, lead and executive, worship. We have a growing number of shortages in every area of pastoral ministry. Kids is probably the one that we feel the most. Everybody is looking for a kids pastor, and there just simply aren't any out there. And so what has gotten us there? How did we arrive at this point? And what I want to do is I want to walk through what a horizon scan would have looked like a few years ago, where if you were doing horizon scanning 5, even 10 years ago, you would have known that there would have been a huge pastor shortage, and you could have prepared for that. And I'm just going to walk you through how that looks, what that would look like if you had done a horizon scan several years ago and identified this trend. So one of the things that we would have known, or that we would have been able to identify, is what we now call today is the Great Resignation. The baby boomer generation is huge. We know that. They are one of the largest generations we've ever had. And of the baby boomers that are in ministry, most of them hold lead pastor positions. Now, we know coming into 2010, really, and moving all the way through into the 2020s, we know that the boomers were going to start resigning. They were going to start moving into retirement. They're going to start shifting into their new phase of life. And so we've known that. We've known that the boomers would retire right around this time. And so what we would have known is that we would have known, okay, boomers are in lead pastor positions. And because there's a large number of them that are going to retire at the same time, we know, or we would have known back then, we would have known that, okay, we need to train and develop more pastors in order to fill that huge gap that was going to create with baby boomers retiring from ministry. Well, unfortunately, we didn't do that. And then we ran into 2020 and the COVID pandemic. And anything that's global, any major tragedy, any major event like that, it becomes an accelerant. And so many baby boomer pastors, they retired early in the midst of COVID, in the midst of the shutdowns, in the midst of the political turmoils, in the midst of all the craziness that has happened over the 3 years. Many baby boomer pastors just said, you know what? I wasn't going to retire for another 5 years, but I think now is the time to do it. In 2020, 2021, and even the beginning of 2022, we've seen a huge resignation from ministry among the baby boomer generation. Now, the problem is that we don't have enough millennials, Gen Xers to fill that gap. Gen X is a small generation itself. So it's easy to recognize that the Generation X, my generation, was not going to be able to fill the gap of boomers. There just aren't enough of us. And then when you couple millennials, and they're still, many of them are still younger. They're still in their mid to late 20s. Not all of them are looking for lead pastor positions. And honestly, some of them just simply aren't ready for that. We would have known that we would have had this huge gap in baby boomers leaving, and we wouldn't have been ready to prepare, or we wouldn't have been able to move pastors into those positions because either they were too young, too inexperienced, or there just weren't enough of them. And so that's the problem. And then we couple that with over 2020, 2021, and even before then, we started seeing this growing trend of pastors burning out and pastors really just kind of saying, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I can't keep up with the demands of ministry. I miss my family. So they're burning out. Depression numbers are rising. Anxiety, stress levels are rising. Suicide rates are rising among pastors. And so when we take all three of those trends, we take the boomer retirement, the COVID acceleration, and then the burnout trend that's been developing over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we would have known that when we arrived to 2022, that there would be a huge pastor shortage. And quite honestly, looking ahead, we know that that's probably not going to change. And here's why. Another trend that we could have paid attention to is the decreasing numbers in Bible college schools, and particularly in ministry-oriented programs. So programs like Masters of Divinity or Biblical Studies, those programs, the declining numbers in those, or the declining numbers in seminary as a whole, if we would have paid attention to that, we would have known that fewer and fewer students were going through those programs, completing those programs, and then even the ones that were completing, fewer of them were moving on to become credentialed with denominations and church organizations around the country. And so that further challenges the numbers for filling all the pastoral positions in our churches around the country. There are some denominations that completely shut down some of their seminaries because the numbers were so low. 2018 was one of those years where many of the seminaries and Bible colleges around the country, they had just reached a point where they could not keep their doors open any longer, and they simply shut down. And there's a few trends that have led to that. Number one, the cost of education has greatly increased. I know when I went to Bible college, I think I spent $70 an hour per credit hour to go to school, and now it's hundreds of dollars per credit hour. The cost of education is just increasing at an incredible rate. And quite honestly, from my perspective and looking at the trends across the higher education system, there is a growing bubble that will burst at some point where the cost of education is just going to kill the education institutions themselves. And so that's one trend. Cost of education is increasingly going up. The other trend is that for us as pastors and ministry leaders, our earning potential cannot match what we're spending for education. It just can't. Most of us will never make enough to pay off the school debt that we accrue over the however many 3, 4, 5 years of Bible college, and then if you go on to seminary, even more so. We will not make enough in our lifetimes on the salaries that we earn in ministry to pay off those debts. And so we have this increasing debt load on pastors going into ministry. The earning potential is really low. And then you have the Dave Ramsey effect. Now, if you're not familiar with this, the Dave Ramsey effect is the growing the growing repellent of debt, especially among middle class. So, if you grow up or if you grew up in a middle class family, there was this understanding that you had to go to school and you had to, you take out school loans in order to go to school so you could then get a job to then pay off the loans. And that was when I was going. So, if you're Generation X or, baby boomers, or maybe a little bit in the early millennials generation, you had this understanding, I have to go to school, I have to accrue this Bible college debt or, the seminary debt in order to get a job to then pay off the debt. However, over the last 10, 15 years, Dave Ramsey has swept across the nation with his mantra, no debt. Now, I know there's nuances, and I'm not going to get into whether or not I agree with Dave Ramsey. But there is an effect that is playing out. There's a trend that's being created that your middle class, so those of us in the middle class, we have this deterrent, that we have this aversion to debt, even to the point where we're saying, I would love to go to Bible college, I would love to go to seminary, but I don't want to accrue debt. And so because of that, I'm just not going to go. I'm going to save up enough money to then pay. And, for most of us, that never really happens unless we're currently in jobs where we can pay as we go. But for the most part, there are hundreds of thousands of people that may be going into Bible college or seminary and getting degrees to go into ministry, but because they have an aversion to debt, because they don't believe philosophically they should take on debt, then they're not going to go. And they're going to stay in their jobs, or they're going to find other avenues to go into ministry and become trained and educated. And so the Dave Ramsey effect, along with low earning potential and high education costs, are leading to lower numbers in Bible colleges, lower numbers in seminaries, lower numbers of graduates, lower numbers applying to be credentialed through different denominational bodies and different church organizations. Those numbers are decreasing. And so again, so we have the Great Resignation, we have Bible college and seminary numbers dropping, and the trends that are leading to those two things. And then the last one that I want to bring out, and these three are not the only trends that you can look at, but these are just a compilation of some of the primary ones that are leading to this shortage of pastors that is causing hiring difficulties for you and for me in our churches. The third one is the shifting perspective on ministry itself. When I felt called into ministry and I went to Bible college and I was preparing for ministry, I could not wait to do ministry. I loved the idea of going into ministry. I loved the idea of living this lifestyle of ministry where I was raising my kids as a pastor, and I was in a church, and I just loved all of that. And part of that is what kept me going. I actually ran out of money my sophomore year of Bible college. I had to go home and I had to work at a fence company for a little while, and then I was able to move back to the city that my college was in, and I worked at a hotel job. I was a security guard for a while. I worked at a couple of restaurants. I worked my way back to go back to Bible college and finish up my degree a couple years later. I was driven because of what ministry was to me back then. The problem is that now, if you're a high school student, even if you're a early college student and you're considering ministry, the reality is that ministry is not inviting anymore. In fact, ministry, the idea and the perspective on ministry has shifted to it's an unhealthy lifestyle. And for you and for me, as pastors and ministry leaders, we can see that. How many of us have put in 60 plus hours a week? Not just 1 week or 2 weeks, but consistently. How many of us have missed significant family time? Not just once or twice, but consistently. We are gone more consistently than we are there. How many of us struggle with stress and anxiety? How many of us deal with thoughts of depression? Or how many of us just deal with, we're just not healthy people? Our bodies aren't healthy. Our minds aren't healthy. We're emotionally not healthy. Ministry, over the years, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, the perspective on ministry is that ministry is an unhealthy career choice. And so what do we do? What do students do? What do people do if they feel called into ministry, but they know what kind of a toll it's going to take and how difficult it's going to be? Now, I knew that to a degree. I knew that going in. I knew that it was going to be hard. I knew that ministry was 24/7. I knew that there were going to be challenges. I knew that I was going to miss times with my family. I knew that. But I think we've moved past understanding that ministry is tough. And now we've moved into ministry is unhealthy. Now, whether that's right or wrong can be debated. But at the end of the day, if you're a high school student, or if you're you're in a career or in a job and you feel the call to ministry, but you know that you're shifting from something that you love and enjoy, or you're a high school student looking for the rest of your life, and you know you're making a choice to go into something that is unhealthy, there's a good chance you're not going to do it. Or you're going to find another way to do ministry without being a pastor. And so ministry has become an unhealthy career choice in the minds of many people. And so we have fewer and fewer people going into ministry. And of those that go into ministry, some of them go into Bible college and seminary. But of those, very few graduate. And of those that graduate, not all of them go on to be credentialed ministers and pastoral roles. We have a growing pastoral shortage. And we would have known that 10 years ago if we had done the horizon scan. If we had looked across the trends, if we had looked across the rising cost of Bible college and seminary, if we would have looked and identified the trend that ministry was moving in an unhealthy way for pastors and ministry leaders, if we would have recognized the growing effects of Dave Ramsey and how he was shifting people's mindsets away from debt, and that taking on debt was a bad thing. If we would have paid attention to the growing numbers in burnout, we would have arrived at 2020, 2021, 2022 with this understanding that we were going to lose a huge number of pastors and we weren't going to be able to replace them. And so we've been able to prepare and shift the model of what we were doing in our church and in our community to maybe either a less pastoral centric model, or we would have figured out ways to train better lay leaders and even move them into pastoral positions. And some of us have done that. Maybe you've done that. But that's where we are today. And the question is if you were to start today and you were to look across the horizon, what would you see? What could you do today now to prepare? Because if you're today looking for a kids pastor, looking for a youth pastor, maybe you're a board member and you know your lead pastor is about to retire and you're looking for someone to replace him, if that's you today, know that it's going to be tough to find someone. Partially because there's just not a lot out there. And partially because what is out there is probably not going to meet your expectations, whatever those are. And most boards and most congregations, their expectations are just way too high. Maybe not too high. Maybe that's not the right word. They are too complex. I know for me, when I've tried looking for ministry positions over the years, I've run into some pretty interesting reasons why I was not hired. Some were legitimate critiques of me, but some were just crazy expectations. And I think that's what we're running into, is that congregations and boards and search committees are looking for something that's really not out there. And then we don't have enough numbers for churches to be super picky about who they hire. And so we have lots and lots of churches around the country who just don't have pastors. And so looking ahead, what do we do? How do we change that? If we look across the horizon now, today, looking into 2025, 2030, what do we need to do now? Because what I think we need to start doing, what you need to start doing, this is my recommendation, is that you need to start discipling your congregation more intensely. You need to be training them in ministry, training them in leadership, training them to step into maybe not a pastoral role, but to fulfill some of the needs that a pastoral role might fulfill. Because there's a good chance, if you're lucky enough to be a lead pastor at a church with one or two other staff, you're going to need to hire or train up more of your lay leaders to step in roles of responsibility. That's just the way it is, especially if you're a church of 500 plus. If you're a church of 500 plus, the need for leaders just increases exponentially. Which means that what I think is going to happen is we're going to see a rise in numbers of churches that are 500 or less. Because that's going to be a model, a ministry model that is more sustainable with the number of pastors we have available. And so the question for you today is, and as we're looking at the future, we're learning how to exercise our strategic foresight muscles, our strategic planning muscles, looking across the horizon today and identifying the trends that are currently happening. What do you see? And what changes do you need to make today in the next year? What changes do you need to make next year in your ministry models, in your philosophies, in your core values? What are the things that need to change? Now, I'm not saying that we need to shift our own biblical perspective. I think that Scripture is Scripture, and I think the principles we pull from Scripture are valuable. And I think they're unchanging and unmoving. I think that Jesus is the center of everything, and I think that salvation is the goal. But I also think the discipleship is a necessary must. We're called to go make disciples. But there's a lot of things about church that are not mandated by Scripture. We don't have to have a kids ministry. We don't have to have a youth ministry. We like it, and I think it's effective, and I think there's value in it. But what are the things that we're doing that maybe we don't need to do? Do we need to have a men's ministry, a women's ministry? Is that something that we absolutely need to do? Do we need to do small groups? Or do we need to shift them a little bit? Do we need to have that giant outreach event every year that costs thousands and thousands of dollars and pulls in a handful of people every year? Sure, lots of people attend the event, but they don't really come to our church. How do we get leaner and smarter and make a greater impact? What are the changes we need to make today based on the trends that we're seeing and looking out over the horizon? That's what horizon scanning is. And that's the first step, really, in strategic foresight. And so I hope this is helpful. I hope that you're able to see how this works. And I know for me, I get super excited about it because I love doing it. I love looking out over the horizon. I love kind of helping pastors and ministry leaders like you. I love helping you see the things that need to shift today so that you're better prepared for tomorrow. Because I think that when we make the decisions today to prepare for the future, then when we get to the future, we're not struggling, we're pivoting. Instead of figuring things out and reacting, we're just implementing the plans that we've already prepared. I think that's a better place for us to be. And quite honestly, for us as pastors and ministry leaders, it's a lot more relaxing to do that. We're able to do that without being all stressed and overwhelmed and struggling with anxieties because we're prepared and ready. And if God moves us in a direction that we weren't prepared for, fine, we shift and we move with God. But usually, we're good at shifting and moving with God. We're not good at shifting and moving with the changes that are coming down the pipe. And too often, we pretend like they're not happening until we don't have any choice but to shift. And so I hope that today you're able to see not only the value in a horizon scan, but also that it's something you can do. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of time to focus. And so start figuring out what the future looks like. Do your horizon scanning. Start looking in your community. Start looking even in your congregation itself. Look out over the horizon and see what's coming. See what changes are occurring. And you'll be able to understand better how to prepare for the future. Because again, our goal here, and what I try to do most, is help you as a pastor and ministry leader live your dream life. And part of that is being planned out and being prepared for what's coming. And part of that is having more time to do this, more time away from the interruptions and more time away from the phone calls and the knocks on the door and the emails and hey, pastor, we really need you to do this today. More time away from all that. And so I want to invite you to go on over to brandonpartycooper.com/moretime-more-money. And right there, you can get a step-by-step process on how you can begin moving towards your dream life, how you can create margin in your time, how you can have more time each day to spend with family. You can have more time every day to spend in your devotions, and more time to spend thinking about the future and doing a horizon scan, more time in your day to just enjoy life and be more fulfilled, as well as more money. I mean, all of us could use more money. If you went to Bible college and you have school debt, you know you need more money because we're not making enough to pay it off. Well, what I want to do is I want to show you how you can create margin in your money, margin in your time, and build this dream life that I think that God has created for you and He wants you to live. And so again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/moretime-more-money. You can get the step-by-step process right there and you can start working on it today. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a beautiful day doing whatever it is you're doing. And I will see you in the next episode.